If you want to think about a gin, I think that is a good analogy. That is exactly what an ancient republic was. There's a tendency now to reduce government types. Democracy versus authoritarianism is how liberals and neoliberals think about it. On the traditionalist right, or some of the so-called reactionaries, was that likely to just make a separation between democracy and monarchy, or modernism as they see it, and monarchy? They all have a dream of being court eunuchs for an American Latinx king like Marco Rubio and rubbing their wrists with Vaseline. This is the so-called trad cats, Vermeulen, people like that. By the way, I should say here, what are the rumors about Rubio? Well, I have heard rumors from Miami, is that he rubs salt on his member. He's called Salt Stick Rubio in some neighborhoods of Miami. And others say he waxes his inner thighs. I don't know, but it's not good to reduce things so much. Democracy versus monarchy only. And then if you're reactionary, let's say you believe democracy is weak and corrupt, and monarchy is great or something like that. But in the past, the take was the opposite, and ancient republics, in any case, like I tell you, had very little to do with what you see now go under that name. You all know anyway that the franchise was so limited in ancient republics that none of them, even the Athenian democracy, would qualify as a democracy today. They would all be called elitist aristocracies or fascist apartheid states, oligarchies, and all such things. Including by the weak conservatives now. They would call it Nazi also. The only reason they don't call them these things is because they aren't faced with the reality. They can ignore the unpleasant reality in books. But they were all apartheid, elitist, fascist, militarist states by any modern definition. There was a long-running argument, for example, in ancient Greece, which stated that only the hoplites, that is to say, the heavy infantry, should be allowed to vote. And this corresponds roughly to what it would cost to buy a new car today. I guess that's about how much a suit of armor cost at the time. You had to supply your own armor as a heavy infantry. So this was a social class roughly equivalent to modern, maybe upper middle class. And the argument was simple. You can guess what it is. And it's something I've claimed myself in the book, which is that only the assembly of armed men should hold the political power in the state, because they are the source of the physical power, of the physical force, and any other kind of arrangement is therefore mendacious. Of course, then there are disagreements about expanding the franchise, but even in that case, it's almost always a military participation argument. In other words, it would have been very hard for Athens, as a naval empire, to deny the franchise to the rowers of the ships. And that's how it became a so-called democracy, because the rowers in the navy, who were poor men and numerous, could now vote as well. This is similar, by the way, to what Andrew Jackson did in America. People forget how limited the franchise was in the early American Republic, and how irresistible in every way, including logically irresistible, was Jackson's argument that you can't really deny political participation to the men that make up your military force. That's a very strong argument, and today it would, however, be considered fascist, elitist, Nazi, every other thing they like to call it. But it was in many ways the basis of ancient republicanism. I'm simplifying here quite a bit, of course, but if you had to think of the difference, it would be that in an ancient republic you had a group of men leading the state who saw it as a way, first of all, to prepare themselves to undergo a training regimen. That's why the word is the same as regime, to undergo this training for the sake of readiness for war. So an ancient republic is in its inception, at least in Greece now I'm saying. The Phoenicians may have had different origins. I don't know, it's another discussion. Some people say the institution of the Senate originates in the Phoenician cities, but that's for another time. But for Greeks, the republics were indisputably originally a military brotherhoods and organized for this purpose. In the case of Sparta, where they claimed the wolfman Lycurgus was the founder. And in the case of the Dorian states, this continued to be, for a long time, a military republic. It was a mess hall barracks culture. In other parts of the Greek world, this discipline was maybe somewhat relaxed, but only from a military point of view. They didn't abandon the military aspect entirely, but it got expanded, maybe you could say, for desire for self-perfection in other ways, which they called virtue. But in all this, they continued to be ruled by the discipline and rigor of an athlete's training regimen and diet, you could think. That's the analogy. Even if they were a sophist or an athlete of the mind, the same thing applied. This is why Aristotle, who I'm not a fan of, he may be entirely made up even, but he say right when he say what the law does not command, it forbids. And this was the ancient attitude, whereas the modern democratic attitude is the opposite. So we don't even have a view of what ancient republics were trying to achieve or why they existed in the first place. They were really, you can think of it, a very large or elaborate gym, whereas the modern state, whether democratic or authoritarian, is dedicated merely to preservation of life for the sake of life, preservation of mere life. And this mere life is embodied in the type of citizen, or rather the type of subject, since there aren't really citizens in any real sense today. But it's embodied, this idea of mere life, it's embodied in a certain type of subject, which is a person that is not the athlete, not the thinker, not the explorer, nor anything great, but the carrier of mere life who is the woman, what you call the wine mom, or the wine aunt, or the affluent liberal white woman. And on behalf of this creature and her comforts, all the cities are arranged, and you're supposed, on behalf of this creature, to bear burdens and to sacrifice your substance and time. So that is one small difference between modern and ancient democracies.